You don't need iron chains to be a prisoner anymore. All it takes is a 30-year mortgage. And suddenly, every night, you fall asleep in a house that technically doesn't even belong to you. They told you freedom means choosing your own path. But what if the paths you're allowed to choose were already laid out by banks, debt collectors, interest rates, and payment schedules? What if the dream, owning a home, getting a degree, driving your own car, wasn't a path to freedom at all, but a set of invisible shackles? Let's be honest, the numbers speak for themselves. As of 2024, 77% of American adults are in debt. That's not just a number, that's a society built on IOUs, a nation where nearly everyone is, in one way or another, indentured. And here's the wild part, we're told this is normal. Not only normal, but responsible. But what if it's not just a financial system? What if it's a moral one? Friedrich Nietzsche, in The Genealogy of Morals, pointed to something terrifying. He argued that our entire concept of guilt, the backbone of our morality, was born from debt. Not metaphorically, literally. According to Nietzsche, ancient societies didn't invent punishment to keep people in line. They created it to help people remember what they owed. In his words, to breed an animal with the right to make promises, man had to learn to remember. And to remember, man had to learn pain. Think about that. Memory wasn't just about facts. It was tied to suffering, to debt, to owing something. Now here's where it gets even darker. In German, the word for guilt and the word for debt are the same, Schuld. You don't just owe money, you owe penance. Your unpaid balance isn't just a number on a screen, it becomes a stain on your soul. You feel bad for missing a payment, you feel ashamed when you fall behind. You internalize that debt as a moral failure, not as a symptom of a system designed to exploit you. And that right there, that's the trap. Because if you believe debt is just about money, you've already lost the game. It's not just about dollars and cents. It's about control. It's about morality. It's about the very architecture of your identity. The system doesn't just want your income. It wants your belief. It wants your faith in the process, your quiet compliance, your ability to suffer in silence, and call it discipline. You think you're free because you chose your major, your mortgage, your loan. But were those really your choices? Or were they pre-written scripts, insert name, sign here, designed by a society that equates suffering with success? This is the first layer of the golden cage. You're not held captive by violence, you're held by consent, disguised as responsibility. And the genius of it all? The system doesn't even need to punish you. You do it yourself. You skip a vacation because there's a payment due. You delay joy because you can't afford it yet. You stay in a job you despise just to pay the bills. You reinforce your own captivity, not with guards, but with guilt. And here's where it gets even worse. Once you start believing that debt is a moral failure, the system has you. You won't rebel. You'll confess. You won't resist. You'll repent. You'll blame yourself, not the rules. You'll think, I just didn't budget right, or I need to work harder. Never once asking, why is the system built this way in the first place? You'll spend your whole life in quiet servitude, believing you're doing the right thing. But what if that belief is the real prison? What if the shame isn't yours to carry? What if debt isn't your failure, but their design? See, if you've been thinking this is about money, you're missing the real story. This is about moral engineering, about psychological control, about a system so effective that it doesn't enslave you with chains, but with ideas. Because here's the truth, debt doesn't just affect your finances. It invades your identity. It rewrites your values. It teaches you that your worth comes from what you owe and how well you obey. Somewhere along the way, you were taught that this was not just acceptable, but noble. Nietzsche called this the aesthetic ideal, the dangerous belief that suffering makes you good, that pain is purification, that to endure hardship is to become morally superior. And so, debt becomes a rite of passage, a symbol of responsibility, a badge of honor. You're praised for cutting back, admired for working 3 jobs, applauded for sacrificing your time, your health, your youth. All for what? To keep up with the payments? Why do we glorify people who suffer quietly under debt? Why do we tell 18-year-olds that taking on $30,000 in student loans is investing in yourself? Why do we call a 30-year mortgage, or you pay double the value of the home, a wise decision? Because this isn't just economics anymore, it's become a kind of cultural religion. Debt is sacred, and repayment is worship. This is the moral trap, a system that teaches you to sanctify your own exploitation. Nietzsche warned us, modern morality didn't evolve out of compassion. It evolved from debt and punishment. In ancient times, if you forgot what you owed, you were punished. And over generations, that punishment wasn't just physical, it became psychological. Guilt stopped being about a broken contract. It became a way of life, and so did obedience. Today, no one needs to beat you in public to keep you in line. All it takes is a late fee, a growing balance, and suddenly, you're apologizing for your very existence. You feel like you've done something wrong. You feel ashamed, embarrassed, inadequate. But is that morality? Or is it manipulation? This is how power hides in plain sight. It moralizes your suffering. You think you're doing the right thing by grinding through work, by sacrificing your life for some future that may never arrive. But you're not being responsible, you're being submissive. You've bowed to a new god, the financial system. And like every god, it demands faith, not in miracles, but in repayment. You are told, stay disciplined, delay gratification, freedom will come. But Nietzsche would ask, who told you that obedience leads to freedom? Who profits from your self-denial? Because the system doesn't just want your labor, it wants your moral allegiance. It wants you to believe that struggle is noble, that financial pain is a test of character, that suffering means you're on the right path, but in truth, it's just a test of how well you've been trained. But it goes deeper than guilt and deeper than control. Because here's where the system really tightens its grip. It doesn't just want you to pay, it wants you to believe that paying is noble, that struggling to stay afloat is admirable, that if you just hold on long enough, do everything right, salvation will come eventually. But eventually never arrives. You end up clapping for the guy who worked 3 jobs and paid off his student loans in 10 years, without asking why he had to suffer that long in the first place. We praise endurance instead of questioning the need for it. We admire sacrifice instead of dismantling what demanded it. This is how the trap stays invisible, because it's dressed up in the robes of virtue. Nietzsche had a word for this kind of twisted morality, the aesthetic ideal, the dangerous belief that suffering purifies, that pain elevates, that enduring hardship somehow makes you good. And in that twisted frame, debt is no longer seen as a burden. It becomes a badge, a rite of passage. Proof that you're mature, responsible, doing it right. But let's really ask, doing what right? Right according to whom? Why do we celebrate people who put off living so they can keep up with monthly payments? Why do we encourage 18-year-olds to take on $30,000 or more in student loans and call it investing in themselves? Why is a 30-year mortgage considered the pinnacle of adulthood when it means spending decades doubling the cost of your home through interest? It's not just economics. It's not just about buying a house or getting a degree. This is about a cultural religion, a belief system. And debt? That's the ritual. Paying your dues, carrying your burden, proving your worth through hardship. This isn't financial maturity, it's moral manipulation. Nietzsche saw it coming. He warned that modern morality wasn't born out of compassion. It was born out of punishment. In ancient times, when someone forgot a debt, they weren't just reminded, they were punished. Memory was tied to pain, and over time, that pain became internal. That punishment became guilt, and that guilt became your compass. So today, no one needs to publicly flog you for missing a payment. All it takes is a notification on your phone, a late fee, a growing balance, and suddenly you feel ashamed. You feel like you've failed. You feel unworthy. But is that guilt real? Or is it engineered? Because the moment your suffering becomes moralized, it becomes invisible. You don't question it. You don't fight back. You blame yourself. You think you're just being responsible by staying in that soul-sucking job, by saying no to joy, by living for the future instead of the present. But you're not being responsible. You're being ruled. You've traded chains for credit cards, masters for lenders. The whip is gone, but the anxiety remains. The commands are gone, but the shame is internal. You don't need someone to tell you what to do, because the guilt does it for them. And that's the brilliance of it. This system doesn't survive by force. It survives because you believe in it. You think you're making good choices. You think you're playing the game smart. But the question is, smart for whom? Because debt isn't just a financial instrument, it's a method of control. It turns your future labor into someone else's present profit. It converts your dreams into collateral. It's the quiet agreement that you'll work for decades, not to build a life, but to repay the one you were sold. This is what Nietzsche would call the will to power. Not the power to dominate others, but the power to shape values. To decide what's right, what's good, what's normal. And in today's world, those who sit at the top have redefined all of it. They don't need to enforce obedience. They just redefine success. And once you believe that success means homeownership, a fancy degree, a new car, and a perfect credit score, you're already playing their game, by their rules, on their board. This isn't capitalism. This is feudalism with Wi-Fi and direct deposit. You're not tilling soil, you're servicing loans. And the lords, they don't wear crowns anymore. They run banks, hedge funds, institutions that print money while you count pennies. Just look at the numbers. As of 2023, the top 0.1% of Americans control more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. That's not a flaw in the system. That is the system. And it runs on debt. It runs on your belief that if you just keep pushing, keep grinding, keep sacrificing, someday you'll be free. But freedom doesn't come from obedience. It doesn't come from patience. It doesn't come from 20 years of doing it right. It comes from seeing the trap and refusing to step into it. Nietzsche gave us a map out of this maze. He called it the Übermensch, the overman. Not a tyrant, not a conqueror, but someone who refuses to be ruled by inherited values. Someone who doesn't wait for permission to live. Someone who creates meaning instead of renting it from the culture. The Übermensch doesn't spend decades chasing freedom. He defines it now. He doesn't tie his worth to credit scores, net worth, or social approval. He doesn't equate struggle with virtue. He sees the game for what it is and chooses to walk away. Not in anger, not because the ultimate act of rebellion in this system isn't rage, it's withdrawal of belief. The system only works if you play by its rules. If you keep scoring your life the way they taught you to. But once you stop, once you write your own rules, the whole thing starts to fall apart. That's self-overcoming. It's not about burning everything down. It's about choosing what matters on your terms. It's about responsibility, but the kind you choose, not the kind forced onto you by lenders, employers, or a culture built on scarcity and shame. And that choice, it starts now. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't want that choice. They say they do. They complain about the grind. They joke about being wage slaves or debt zombies. But when it comes down to it, the trap is comforting, predictable, familiar. And Nietzsche understood this too. He called it herd morality, the instinct to follow, conform, submit. Because to break away from the herd is terrifying. It means you have to think for yourself, choose for yourself, and more importantly, take responsibility for the consequences. Most would rather stay miserable and blameless than free and uncertain. And so they worship safety, stability, order, even if that order comes from an economic system that bleeds them dry. Even if that safety is an illusion, built on the constant fear of falling behind. They'd rather be anxious with a roadmap than lost with agency. But this is where Nietzsche's warning gets even sharper. The longer you wait to reclaim your freedom, the harder it becomes. Because over time, you don't just live in the system, you start to internalize it. Its voice becomes your voice. Its values become your values. Its fears become your fears. And then you're not just trapped by debt, you're defined by it. You think you're being smart for deferring your dreams. You think you're being mature for picking the safe job. You think you're being responsible for saying no to joy and yes to obligation. But look closer. Who taught you that? Who profits when you define adulthood as a lifetime of repayment? Who gains when you tie your self-worth to productivity? Who wins when your fear of instability keeps you locked into a job, a mortgage, a system? It's not you. It never was. But once you see it, really see it, everything changes. Because freedom isn't a finish line, it's a stance, a perspective. And it starts by questioning the very ideas you were told never to question. Like the idea that debt is inevitable, that it's normal to take out a $200,000 loan for a degree that may or may not lead to a stable job, that it's mature to chain yourself to a 30-year mortgage before you even know who you are, that it's noble to sacrifice your health, your time, your soul for the promise of a secure retirement. Retirement, that's just another carrot on a stick, another future payoff that keeps you obedient in the present. But why wait to live? Why not invert the timeline? Why not front-load your freedom while you're still young, mobile, curious, alive? That's the radical idea, because when Nietzsche talked about becoming who you are, he didn't mean waiting until your 60s to finally read poetry or travel or take risks. He meant shedding the masks, breaking the scripts, living from the inside out, not the outside in. And to do that, you have to be willing to disappoint people, to confuse them, scare them, maybe even lose them. Because if your life makes perfect sense to everyone around you, you're probably not living your life. You're living a socially approved version of it. The Ubermensch doesn't ask for approval. He doesn't chase validation. He creates value, not for others, but from within. So what does that look like in a world run on debt? It means choosing simplicity over status. It means redefining success, not as accumulation, but as agency. It means building a life where your time is yours, your energy is yours, your choices are yours. And yes, it means saying no to the shiny job with golden handcuffs, to the overpriced degree, to the house that doubles as a financial anchor. It means disappointing your parents, defying your peers, and maybe even scaring yourself a little. But the reward? You wake up. You start to feel again, think again, choose again. Not because someone told you to, not because it's a clever financial move, but because it's the only path worth walking, the one where your soul isn't mortgaged out for someone else's gain. And here's where Nietzsche's brilliance shines brightest. He didn't offer a map. He didn't say, here's how to escape. He said, here's how to become. Because there is no final destination, no endgame, no magical point where everything is safe, secure, finished. There's only this, the daily act of choosing freedom over fear, of choosing creation over conformity, of choosing meaning over management. And that's terrifying, but it's also sacred, because once you reclaim your power to define value, not just economic value, but existential value, you become dangerous. Not in a violent way, not in a rebellious way, but in the most powerful way possible. You become uncontrollable. No algorithm can predict you, no boss can own you, no lender can chain you. You move differently, speak differently, live differently. You no longer run from debt, you reject the worldview that made debt necessary in the first place. You stop treating your life as a ledger, and you start living it as a work of art. That is the Nietzschean revolution. Not chaos, not destruction, but transformation. From worker to creator, from debtor to philosopher, from herd animal to Ubermensch. And that transformation starts with a question. What if everything you were taught to chase, security, success, status? So what do you do when you finally see the trap? When the veil lifts and you realize the treadmill doesn't lead to freedom, it leads right back to the starting line, just with more fatigue. You stop running, you step off, and for a moment it's disorienting, quiet, empty. Because when you remove the noise of deadlines, obligations, performance reviews, loan payments, you're left with something terrifying, yourself. And that's when the real work begins. Not the work of making money, but the work of making meaning, of figuring out who you are when you're not just fulfilling roles. Student, employee, consumer, debtor. Most people never reach this point. They spend their lives evading it. Because when you look into that silence, you confront everything you've been avoiding. Your pain, your potential, your unlived life. And Nietzsche believed that confrontation was essential. Not to punish yourself, but to forge yourself. He called it the path of self-overcoming. The idea that growth doesn't come from comfort or convenience, but from embracing struggle. Not meaningless toil, but purposeful friction. Because it's in that friction that character is formed. Most modern struggles, climbing the corporate ladder, maximizing your ROI, managing your LinkedIn profile, don't build character. They build compliance. They train you to optimize yourself for a machine that does not love you, will not reward you, and cannot see you. But struggle can be sacred. When it's chosen, when it's yours. Like the struggle of creating something beautiful, or standing for something unpopular, or saying no to easy applause in favor of difficult truth. This is what Nietzsche meant when he said, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." The dancing star isn't just joy or success, it's originality. It's the light that comes only after darkness, only after you've stared into the abyss and refused to blink. That abyss? It's the world you were told to accept, the world where you're born into debt, schooled into obedience, employed into exhaustion, retired into regret. But you don't have to accept it. You can build another world, not through revolution or protest or escapism, but through small, radical acts of freedom, like learning a skill because it fascinates you, not because it monetizes well, like moving to a place that inspires you, even if it doesn't impress anyone, like waking up without an alarm clock and spending the morning reading, writing, walking, dreaming. These are small things, but they add up, they compound, and eventually, they form the shape of a new life. A life with fewer comforts maybe, but deeper satisfaction. A life that may look strange from the outside, but feels true on the inside. And when you live that way, you give others permission to do the same. You become proof that another mode of existence is possible. Not just possible, but preferable. You don't need to be rich. You don't need to be famous. You just need to be free. And freedom isn't about having everything. It's about needing less. It's about no longer craving validation from people whose lives you wouldn't want. It's about seeing clearly how systems exploit your fear, how culture sells you lies, how institutions survive by keeping you small. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you choose differently, you change everything. That's what Nietzsche meant when he said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." Your why won't come from a salary or a diploma or a 5-year plan. It will come from within. From the part of you that refuses to be anesthetized by debt and duty and distraction. That part of you is still alive. You might not hear it often, buried as it is beneath emails, mortgages, metrics, but it's there, and it's waiting for you. Not to retire, not to be saved, but to wake up. So where do you start? Not with a master plan, not with a 12-step program, not with a YouTube channel promising passive income in 30 days. You start by reclaiming one thing, your time. Even if it's just 30 minutes a day, even if it's just a walk or a journal or a quiet sit with your thoughts. Because time is the first frontier of freedom. The thing debt steals from you, the thing employment sells from you, the thing consumerism distracts you from. Reclaim it, and you reclaim your life. And from there, you build. Not faster, not louder, but truer. One step at a time, one choice at a time, one quiet act of rebellion at a time, until your life is no longer a reaction, but a creation. And you are no longer a debtor, but a philosopher. Not in theory, but in practice, just like Nietzsche intended.